The words hung in the air between us, sharp and jagged as broken glass. You sold our dream home? My son, my David, stood in my kitchen, his face a mask of such raw betrayal that for a moment I couldn't breathe. I had known this moment was coming, had rehearsed a dozen different ways to say it, but nothing could have prepared me for the physical pain of seeing the hurt in my own child's eyes. He had driven straight over after seeing the sold sign pounded into the front lawn of the old Victorian on Maple Street, the one his father and I had painstakingly restored, the house where he'd taken his first steps, where we'd built tree forts and held countless birthday parties, the very walls that held the echo of our family's laughter and, eventually, its silence. He just stared at me, his chest heaving, waiting for an answer that could possibly make sense. Mom, how could you? That was Dad's house. That was our house. You didn't even talk to me? His voice cracked on the last word, and it shattered what was left of my composure. I reached for a dish towel, just to have something to do with my trembling hands, and looked out the window of this small, rented condo, a place that held no memories, good or bad. David, I began, my voice barely a whisper. Please, sit down. He didn't move. He remained rooted by the island, a 35-year-old man looking every bit like the little boy who'd just had his favorite toy ripped away. I took a deep, ragged breath, the truth a heavy stone in my chest. I sold it, I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze, because I found out something about your father. The anger in his eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. What are you talking about? Dad's been gone for 3 years. What could he possibly have to do with you selling our home without a word to me? I walked slowly to the small kitchen table and pulled out a chair, sinking into it. The fight seemed to go out of him then, and he reluctantly sat across from me, his posture stiff, unforgiving. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, and I saw the man he was, the successful architect, the wonderful father to my granddaughter, but all I could see in that moment was the little boy who had idolized his father, and I was about to tear that idol down. It started about 6 months ago, I began, my fingers tracing a knot in the wooden table. I was in the attic, finally going through the last of your father's things. It was time, or so I thought. I found an old cardboard box, one I'd never seen before, tucked behind the Christmas decorations. It was labeled Tax Documents Shred, in Robert's perfect architect's print. I could still feel the chill of the attic air, the smell of old pine and dust. I was about to just take it down to the shredder, but something made me open it. Inside, there wasn't a single tax form. There were envelopes, dozens of them, all addressed to your father, all from a law firm in Portland I'd never heard of, and they were all opened. David was watching me intently now, his anger momentarily banked by curiosity. So, Dad had business all over. It was probably for some old project. I shook my head slowly. It wasn't for a project, David. It was about a person, a woman named Helen. Helen Carter. The name felt foreign and dangerous on my tongue. I saw him search his memory, his brow furrowed. The name doesn't ring a bell, he said, a note of impatience creeping back in. Who is she? I looked down at my hands, at the wedding band I still wore, the symbol of a 38-year marriage that I was now realizing had been built, in part, on a foundation of secrets. According to the letters, David, Helen Carter was your father's first wife. The silence in the room was absolute. It was more than silence. It was a vacuum, sucking all the sound and air out of the space. David's face went blank, then cycled through disbelief, confusion, and then settled back into a deeper, colder anger. That's insane. That's a lie. Dad was never married before you. He would have told us. He would have told me. His certainty was a fortress, built brick by a father who had always been presented as honest, steadfast, a pillar. I thought the same thing, I whispered, the memory of that moment in the attic washing over me again. I thought it was some kind of mistake, a case of mistaken identity. So I called the law firm. I spoke with a very polite, very elderly man named Mr. Albright, who had been your father's attorney for years, and he confirmed it all. Robert was married to Helen for just under 2 years, long before he met me. The marriage was annulled. I watched as David tried to process this, his mind struggling to rewrite the history he'd always known. Annulled? Why? And why are we only hearing about this now? I took a shaky breath. That's the part I couldn't understand either. Why the secrecy? An annulment from a brief, failed marriage in his 20s. It was sad, but it wasn't scandalous. So I asked Mr. Albright why Robert had been so secretive, and that's when he told me. I looked directly into my son's eyes, bracing myself for the impact of the next words. The annulment wasn't just because the marriage failed, David. It was because there was a child. David recoiled as if I'd struck him. What? The word was a puff of air, stunned and disbelieving. A child? Dad had a... You're saying I have a sibling? He stood up abruptly, the chair legs scraping harshly against the tile floor. He ran a hand through his hair, turning his back to me, his shoulders tense. This is crazy, Mom. This is some kind of... I don't know what this is. A secret wife? A secret kid? This isn't my father you're talking about. My father was Robert Miller, the man who coached my Little League team, who taught me how to change a tire, who held my hand when I got my first stitches. That man didn't have a secret family. His voice broke, and my heart broke with it. I know, I said, my own tears finally spilling over. I know, baby. I felt the same way. I felt like the man I'd shared a bed and a life with for nearly 40 decades was a stranger. But it was true. Mr. Albright gave me the details. A daughter. Her name is Sarah. She was born a few months after the annulment was finalized. Helen moved back to her family in Ohio and raised her there. Robert, your father, he signed away his parental rights. He sent support payments, quietly, for 18 years. But he never saw her. He never once reached out. He erased them. I let that ugly truth hang in the air between us. The image of my husband, the kind and loving man I thought I knew, willingly abandoning his own child, was a stain I couldn't wash out of my mind. David turned around, his face pale. Why? Why would he do that? He asked, his voice hollow. That's what I asked myself for weeks, I admitted, wiping my cheeks. I was lost in it. I'd be making dinner and just start crying. I'd look at his picture and not recognize the man smiling back. The house, our dream home, it started to feel like a tomb. Every room was a lie. The porch swing where we'd planned our retirement, the kitchen where we'd danced on a random Tuesday night, the dining room where we'd hosted every Thanksgiving, it was all built on this massive, hidden silence. I couldn't live there anymore. The weight of it was crushing me. Selling it wasn't about the money, it was about my survival. I had to get out from under that secret. He was quiet for a long time, just staring at the floor, his mind undoubtedly racing, trying to fit this new, horrifying puzzle piece into the picture of his father. The anger had drained from his body, replaced by a profound and weary confusion. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not the angry man from 10 minutes ago, but my lost little boy. So what now? He asked, his voice soft and defeated. What do we do with this? I reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, he took my hand. His was cold. I don't know, David, I said honestly, but selling the house gave me the resources to do something. I found her. I found Sarah. His hand went rigid in mine. You... what? The words were barely a whisper, laced with a kind of terrified awe. He pulled his hand back slowly, as if my skin had suddenly burned him. You found her? Where? How? I could see the conflict raging within him, a lifetime of loyalty to his father, warring with a dawning, horrified curiosity about this ghost from a past he never knew existed. After I spoke with Mr. Albright, I had a name and a state. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. I hired a private investigator, a discreet woman named Martha. It took her a few weeks, but she found Sarah Carter, now Sarah Carter Williams, living in a suburb of Cleveland. She's 51 years old. She's a high school English teacher. She's been married for 25 years to a man named Mark. They have 2 sons. I recited the facts like a prayer, each one a bead on the rosary of this new, fractured reality. She never knew Robert. Her mother told her that her father was a man who didn't want to be a father, who signed his rights away before she was even born. Helen passed away 10 years ago from breast cancer, and she took most of the story with her. David sank back into his chair, the weight of it all seeming to press him down. A teacher, he repeated, the word mundane and earth-shattering at the same time. Does she know about us? About me? I shook my head, my throat tight. Not yet. The investigator was very clear. We have the information. The ball is in our court. I've been sitting on this for 2 months, David. Holding this secret alone it's been like carrying a lead weight in my chest. Selling the house was the first step in setting it down. The money, I didn't do it for me. I set up a trust for her, for Sarah. It's the college fund Robert never gave her. It's the wedding gift she never got. It's an apology from a family she doesn't know exists. I watched him, my heart pounding, waiting for his judgment, for his anger to return, for him to tell me I was crazy, that I was betraying his father's memory. Instead, he asked a question that cut me to the core. Did he ever love us, Mom? Or were we just his second chance, the family he actually wanted to keep? His voice was small, the question of a wounded child. I moved from my chair to his, kneeling beside him, and taking both of his hands in mine, forcing him to look at me. Listen to me, David Miller. Your father loved you more than anything in this world. The way he looked at you, that was real. The man who taught you to ride a bike was real. The man who stayed up all night with you when you had the flu was real. That man existed. I have to believe that whatever happened with Helen, whatever terrible choice he made, was a part of him he was deeply, deeply ashamed of, a part he tried to bury forever. He built a beautiful life with us, a life he was proud of. I have to hold on to that, or I'll go mad. He squeezed my hands, his eyes glistening. What do we do, Mom? He asked again, but this time it wasn't a question of defeat. It was a question of direction. I want to meet her, I said, the decision I had been wrestling with in the lonely quiet of this new condo finally spoken aloud. I have to. I need to look her in the eyes and, I don't know, apologize for a sin I didn't commit. Tell her that the man who was her father wasn't entirely a monster. And I need to give her what's rightfully hers. But David, I can't do it alone. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears. What if she wanted nothing to do with us? What if we were opening a door that would only lead to more pain? What if seeing her was like seeing a ghost of the man we loved, a constant, living reminder of his betrayal? He looked at me, my son, my rock, and I saw the little boy fade away, replaced by the strong, compassionate man he had become. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said, his voice firm now, resolute. Okay, Mom, we'll do it together. We'll go to Ohio. The word Ohio hung in the air between us. A simple two-syllable state name that now felt like a destination to another planet. Okay, Mom. We'll do it together. We'll go to Ohio. The resolve in his voice was the first solid ground I'd felt under my feet in months. But almost immediately, the practical, protective part of him, the part he got from his father, kicked in. But we can't just show up on her doorstep, he continued, his architect's mind already building a framework for this impossible situation. We need a plan. We need to write a letter, or have the investigator contact her first, feel it out. We can't ambush this woman with a lifetime of baggage on a random Tuesday. He was right, of course. The thought of standing on a stranger's porch, my heart in my throat, trying to explain who I was the stuff of nightmares. A letter, I agreed, my voice still shaky with the relief of not being alone in this anymore. What in God's name do we even say? Dear Sarah, you don't know us, but your biological father, who abandoned you, was my husband, and this is your half-brother. P.S. We sold our house for you. The absurdity of it hit us both at once, and a strained, slightly hysterical laugh escaped me. David managed a weak smile, the first one I'd seen on his face since he'd stormed into my kitchen. We might need to workshop the phrasing a little, he said dryly. For the next 3 days, my small condo became our war room. We ordered tape out and spread notepads and laptops across the kitchen table, the ghost of Robert Miller a silent, looming presence in the room. Drafting that letter was the most difficult thing I have ever written, more difficult than the eulogy I gave for him. A eulogy is for the person you knew. This was for the person we never did. David was my anchor, his logical mind balancing my emotional turmoil. We should lead with you, he suggested, his fingers steepled under his chin. A woman reaching out to another woman? It's less confrontational than hearing from me, the son he kept. We decided on a simple, heartfelt approach. I introduced myself as Linda Miller, Robert's widow. I stated the bare, unvarnished truth that I had only recently, and by accident, discovered his first marriage and her existence after his passing. I emphasized that Robert had never spoken of her, a painful fact that I knew she would need to hear. I wrote that I was filled with a profound sense of regret and a desire to connect if she was open to it. I included a recent photograph of myself and one of David and his daughter, my sweet little Chloe, hoping the sight of a smiling, normal-looking family might soften the shock. I did not mention the money. That was a conversation for much, much later, if there ever was one. I ended with my phone number and email address, writing that I would understand completely if she chose not to respond, but that the door was open, without expectation. We sent it through the investigator, Martha, who had a P.O. box for such sensitive communications. And then we waited. The silence that followed was a special kind of agony. Every ring of my phone sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. Every email notification made my breath catch. David called me every day, his voice a careful, neutral mask, but I could hear the tension humming beneath the surface. Nothing yet, Mom. It's only been 4 days. Give it time. But time had taken on a new, cruel dimension. I found myself lying awake at night, imagining her receiving the letter. I pictured her in a teacher's lounge, opening it with curious hands, her face collapsing in shock and anger. I imagined her showing it to her husband, Mark, his protective instincts flaring, telling her to tear it up, that we were nothing but trouble. I imagined her throwing it away, unread, a piece of junk mail from a past she had rightly sealed shut. The fear that we had made a catastrophic mistake began to gnaw at me. We had disrupted her peace, unburdened ourselves onto her, and for what? For our own selfish need for answers? For absolution we had no right to ask for? A week and 2 days after we sent the letter, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a 216 area code. Cleveland. My entire body went cold, then hot. I was sitting in my living room, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I fumbled for the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Hello? I breathed, my voice thin and reedy. There was a pause on the other end, a silence filled with 1,000 unspoken words. Then a woman's voice, calm and measured, but with a slight tremor running through it, said, "Linda, this is Sarah. Sarah Williams. I got your letter." The room disappeared. There was only her voice, a voice I had conjured in my dreams, now real and tangible in my ear. It was a nice voice, a warm alto. It didn't sound like Robert's. I was irrationally grateful for that. "Sarah," I said, her name a prayer on my lips. "Thank you. Thank you for calling." Another pause. This one softer. "It was a lot to process," she said carefully. "I have to be honest, I almost didn't. My husband thought it was a scam." A small, watery laugh escaped me. I don't blame him. I probably would have thought the same thing. I heard her take a slow breath. "You said in your letter that he never mentioned me, not once." It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation of her deepest, oldest wound. "Not once, Sarah," I whispered, the shame for his actions, for our ignorance, washing over me anew. "I am so sorry. We both are. My son, David, and we had no idea you existed. If we had," I trailed off, because the if was a bottomless chasm of what might have been. She was quiet for a moment, and I could almost feel her weighing the truth in my words. "I believe you," she said finally, and those 3 words felt like a pardon. "My mother, she never said a bad word about him. She just said he was very young and he wasn't ready. She made her peace with it. I think I have too, for the most part." Then she asked a question that surprised me with its simple, human curiosity. "What was he like? The man you knew?" And so I told her. Sitting there in my quiet condo, the phone pressed to my ear, I began to paint a picture of the man I had loved for nearly 4 decades, for the daughter he had never known. I started with the small things, the human details I thought she might crave. "He was messy," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. "He'd leave a trail of coffee mugs and drafting pencils all through the house. He hated mayonnaise with a passion, but he loved a good sharp cheddar cheese. He could whistle any tune he'd ever heard perfectly after just one listen." I told her about his dedication, how he would work late into the night on a blueprint, the light from his study a beacon in our dark house. I told her about the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he laughed, a deep, rolling sound that could fill a room. I spoke of his patience, how he taught our son to build a birdhouse, his large, capable hands guiding David's small, fumbling ones. I was careful, so careful, to only give her the good and the true, the man I had cherished, not the ghost who now haunted me. I didn't mention the secret keeping, the locked box in the attic, the profound, hidden shame that had allowed him to live this double life of sorts. I gave her the father David had known, because it was the only father I had to give. She listened, utterly silent except for the soft sound of her breathing. When I finished, there was a long, contemplative silence. "He sounds lovely," she said, and her voice was thick with a complex emotion I couldn't quite name. Not jealousy, not anger, but a profound, wistful sadness. "It's strange, hearing you talk. It's like listening to a story about a character in a book. I spent my whole life with a blank space where a father should have been, and now you've given that space a face, a laugh, a hatred of mayonnaise." She let out a soft, shaky breath. "Thank you for that, Linda. Truly." The gratitude in her voice undid me, and I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. She was thanking me, For what? For fragments of a man who had denied her his whole life? The injustice of it all was a physical ache. "He was lovely," I whispered, my voice cracking. "And he was flawed, Sarah, deeply flawed. What he did to you, to your mother, it was unforgivable." There was another pause, and I could feel the tenor of the conversation shifting, moving from a historical account to the raw, present-tense reality. "My mother never used that word," she said quietly. "She always said he was a boy who made a man's decision and couldn't live with the consequences. She never hated him. She said it broke something in him, too." The grace in that statement, passed down from a woman I would never meet, left me humbled and speechless. It was then that David, who had been sitting silently on the other side of the room, watching me with worried eyes, gestured frantically, mouthing, "Ask her, ask her." My heart leaped into my throat again. I took a fortifying breath. "Sarah, this is a big thing to ask, and please feel no pressure whatsoever, but my son David is here with me. We were wondering if you might be willing to meet us. Just for coffee. Somewhere public. Neutral. We could come to Cleveland." The silence on the other end of the line stretched, taut and terrifying. I could hear the faint sounds of her life in the background, a distant television, the clatter of a dish. She was in her home, a place built without any piece of us, and we were asking to step into it. "I need to talk to my husband," she said, finally, her voice more guarded now. "And my boys. This affects them too now. They have a grandfather they never knew about, and now an entire other branch of a family." The word branch felt so fragile, so tenuous. "Of course," I said quickly, my hopes deflating. "Of course, you take all the time you need. There's no rush." We exchanged a few more polite, strained pleasantries before hanging up. I set the phone down on the coffee table, my hand trembling. I looked at David, his face a mirror of my own anxious anticipation. "She's going to talk to her family," I said. He nodded slowly, running a hand over his jaw. "That's fair. That's what we do." He came over and sat beside me, putting a sturdy arm around my shoulders. "You did good, Mom. You were perfect." But the waiting had only just begun, and this new chapter of it was somehow more agonizing than the last. We had heard her voice. We had given her a piece of our Robert. And now we had to wait to see if she would offer a piece of herself in return. The next 48 hours were a lesson in exquisite torture. Every mundane activity, washing a dish, folding laundry, trying to read a book, was punctuated by the silent, screaming question of what was happening in a house in Ohio. Had she told her husband? Had she gathered her sons, 2 young men around David's age, and explained that their family tree had just sprouted a massive hidden limb? What were they saying? Were they angry? Curious? Dismissive? David stayed with me, camping out on my sofa, his presence a quiet bulwark against the tide of my anxiety. We didn't talk about it much. There was nothing left to say. We just moved around each other in the small space, 2 planets orbiting the same dark sun of uncertainty. He fielded calls from his wife, Jessica, who was supportive but worried, and he video chatted with Chloe, whose innocent babble was the only thing that could momentarily lift the heavy shroud in the room. I watched him with his daughter, the easy way he made her laugh, and my heart ached with a fresh wave of pain for Robert. He had missed this. He had chosen to miss this with Sarah. The willful nature of that abandonment felt more monstrous to me than ever. It was late on the second evening, the sky outside my window a deep indigo, when my phone lit up with another 216 number. David, who had been pretending to read a magazine, immediately sat bolt upright, his eyes locked on me. I picked up the phone, my hand so unsteady I nearly dropped it. "Hello? Linda? It's Sarah again." Her voice was different this time, softer, more settled, but with a new layer of nervous energy humming beneath the surface. "I've spoken with Mark and the boys." She took a breath, and I clutched the phone tighter, bracing for the polite refusal. They were shocked, obviously. My youngest, Noah, he's in college. He thought it was some kind of elaborate prank at first. A small, nervous laugh. But after we talked it through, they think I should meet you. The air rushed out of my lungs in a single grateful sob. David, seeing my reaction, slumped forward, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with relief. "Oh, Sarah," I managed to whisper. "Thank you." "There's a condition, though," she continued, her tone firming up. "Mark, he's very protective. He wants to be there. And he thinks it should be just you and me and him for this first meeting. No David." My eyes flicked to my son, and I saw the immediate flash of disappointment on his face. He'd been my rock through this, and now he was being asked to stand down. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I understand. Completely. It made sense. This was about the two women at the heart of the story first. Adding the son, the living legacy of the man who had wronged her, was a complication for another day. "There's a quiet little cafe near us," Sarah said. "The Daily Grind. It's never too busy on Saturday afternoons. Would this Saturday work?" This Saturday. In 3 days. The world, which had been moving in slow, agonizing increments, suddenly snapped into fast forward. "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Saturday is perfect. Just tell me the time." We settled on 2 p.m. After we hung up, I relayed the plan to David. He absorbed it, his initial disappointment giving way to pragmatic acceptance. "She's right. This is about you two first. I get it. I'll drive you to Cleveland, Mom. I'll wait at the hotel. You're not doing this alone." The love in that simple statement filled me with a strength I desperately needed. We were really doing this. We were going to look my husband's secret in the eye. The drive to Ohio felt like a pilgrimage into the heart of our family's hidden history. The flat, sprawling landscapes outside the car window were a stark contrast to the rolling hills of Pennsylvania we called home. David drove in focused silence, and I was grateful for it. My mind was a whirlwind of rehearsed speeches and frantic worries. What would I even say when I saw her? Would she look like him? Would I see Robert in the curve of her smile, the set of her eyes? The thought was both terrifying and compelling. We checked into a bland, comfortable hotel on the outskirts of her town. The room felt sterile and temporary, a waiting room for a life-altering event. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar hum of the highway, imagining 100 different versions of the next day. In some, Sarah was cold and accusatory. In others, she was as warm as she had been on the phone. In my most fearful imaginings, she took one look at me, turned around, and walked right back out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there alone with the shattered pieces of my good intentions. Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzly. The weather seemed to match the solemnity of the occasion. David and I had a quiet, mostly uneaten breakfast in the hotel restaurant. "You ready for this?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "No," I answered honestly, "but I'm going to do it anyway." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Just be you, Mom. That's all you can be." At 1:30 p.m., he dropped me off a block away from the Daily Grind. "I'll be right here at this coffee shop down the street," he said, pointing. "Take all the time you need. Call me when you're done." I got out of the car, my knees feeling weak. I walked the short distance, the drizzle misting my hair and coat. I pushed open the door to the cafe, and the warm, rich scent of coffee and baked goods enveloped me. It was a cozy place, with mismatched armchairs and local art on the walls. And there, in a booth near the back, sat a woman. She was looking down at her phone, but as if sensing my presence, she glanced up. Our eyes met across the room. Time stopped. She had Robert's eyes. There was no doubt about it. They were the same clear, intelligent blue, the same shape. She had my husband's eyes, and she was looking right at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. We were just two women, separated by a coffee-scented room and 50 years of a man's secret, locked in a gaze that held a universe of unspoken questions. She had his eyes, but the rest of her was her own. A kind, slightly weary face framed by soft brown hair shot through with subtle strands of gray, and a posture that was both poised and slightly guarded. She gave a small, tentative smile and raised her hand in a slight wave. That broke the spell. I walked towards the booth, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure everyone in the cafe could hear it. As I got closer, I saw a man sitting beside her. Mark, I presumed. He was broad-shouldered, with a close-cropped beard and watchful eyes that took me in with a single, swift, assessing glance. He wasn't hostile, but he was clearly on duty, his protective aura a tangible force around his wife. "Linda?" Sarah said as I reached the table, her voice the same warm alto from the phone, now colored with a nervous tremor. "Yes. Hello, Sarah," I said, my own voice thin. I slid into the booth opposite them, my purse clutched in my lap like a life preserver. "This is my husband, Mark," she said, and he nodded at me, a curt, polite gesture. "Mark, this is Linda." "It's nice to meet you," I said, the social pleasantry feeling absurd given the circumstances. A young waiter appeared, and we ordered coffee, a mundane ritual that provided a brief, merciful respite from the overwhelming tension. Once the waiter left, an awkward silence descended. We all just looked at each other, three people bound by the ghost of a fourth. I was the interloper here, the one who had shattered their peaceful reality. I knew I had to speak first. "Thank you," I began, forcing myself to meet Sarah's gaze, to look directly into those familiar, unsettlingly blue eyes. "Thank you for being willing to do this. I know it can't be easy." She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "It's not," she admitted frankly. "But after your call, the curiosity was eating me alive. I had to put a face to the name, to the story." Mark placed a hand over hers on the table, a silent show of solidarity. "Sarah's been very strong through all of this. We just want to understand what this is about, what you're hoping for here." It was a fair, direct question. I took a deep breath. "I'm not entirely sure what I'm hoping for," I confessed, deciding on brutal honesty. "I think I needed to look you in the eye and apologize for my husband's actions, for our ignorance, for the fact that you were out in the world and we never knew. It feels like a debt that needed to be paid." She studied me, her head tilted slightly. "You don't have to apologize for him," she said softly. "You didn't know. My mother, she made her peace. She said he was a good man who made one terrible, cowardly decision when he was too young to understand the weight of it. She never let me hate him. She said hate would only poison me." Hearing her mother's grace articulated so clearly, a grace I was struggling so hard to find within myself, brought fresh tears to my eyes. I blinked them back furiously. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," I whispered. Our coffee arrived, and we all took a moment, sipping the hot, bitter liquid, using the cups as something to hold, to focus on. "What was she like?" I asked, genuinely wanting to know. "Helen?" A soft, genuine smile touched Sarah's lips for the first time. She was tough. A single mom in the 70s, working as a secretary. She didn't have it easy, but she was so full of life. She loved to dance in the kitchen while she was making dinner. She was a voracious reader. She always told me I was enough, just as I was. She looked at me, her expression open and unbearably sad. She never badmouthed him, Linda, not once. She just said he was lost, and that some people get so lost they can't find their way back. The image she painted was so different from the narrative of betrayal and anger I had constructed in my head. It was a story of forgiveness, of moving on. It made Robert's lifelong secrecy feel even more tragic and unnecessary. We talked for over an hour, the conversation slowly losing its stilted edge. We didn't talk about Robert much more. Instead, we talked about our lives. I told her about being a librarian, about David's work, about my granddaughter Chloe. She told me about teaching teenagers Shakespeare, about her son Noah's passion for soccer, and her older son Ethan, who was in graduate school. It was surreal exchanging these ordinary family details with a woman who was, by blood, my family, but who had been a stranger until this moment. Eventually, Mark, who had been mostly silent, watching the exchange with a careful, protective eye, glanced at his watch. "We should probably think about heading out," he said gently. The meeting was coming to a close. I felt a sudden, sharp panic. It wasn't enough. I couldn't let her walk away without telling her everything. "Sarah," I said, my voice urgent, "there's one more thing. The reason I was able to find you, I sold our family home, the house Robert and I shared for 35 years. Her eyes widened in surprise. Mark's posture straightened, his guard going up again. "I didn't do it out of guilt," I rushed to explain. "I did it because I couldn't live there anymore, with the weight of that secret. And with the proceeds, I've set up a trust for you, for your family. It's yours, no strings attached." I pulled a business card from my purse, the financial advisor handling the trust, and slid it across the table to her. She stared at it as if it were a live snake, her face pale. I can't take that," she stammered, looking from the card to me, her composure finally cracking. "Linda, that's too much. That's your money, from your life." "It's from his life," I corrected gently. "And a part of that life belonged to you. Please, just take the card, think about it, talk to Mark. It's the right thing to do." She looked at her husband, a silent, profound communication passing between them. After a long moment, she picked up the card and slowly put it in her purse without looking at it. She didn't agree, but she didn't refuse. It was a start. We stood up, the meeting clearly over. There were no hugs, just another round of awkward, meaningful looks. "Thank you for the coffee," Sarah said, "and for telling me about him." I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. I watched them walk out of the cafe, Mark's arm around her shoulders, and I was left alone in the booth, the ghost of Robert's eyes lingering in the space where his daughter had just been sitting. I sat there for a long time after they left, the dregs of my coffee cold in the cup, the imprint of Sarah's presence, of Robert's eyes in her face, seared into my mind. The meeting had been both more painful and more peaceful than I had imagined. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful reunion, just a quiet, profound acknowledgement of a shared, complicated history. Her mother's grace astounded me. Helen had carried this alone, had raised a daughter with love and without bitterness, and had somehow found a way to forgive the man who had abandoned them. It made the fortress of silence Robert had built around his own heart seem all the more tragic and foolish. I finally gathered my things and walked out into the drizzle, the cool mist a relief on my flushed cheeks. I pulled out my phone and called David. He answered on the first ring. "Mom? How did it go?" His voice was tight with anxiety. "It was okay," I said, the word feeling entirely inadequate. "I'm on my way to you." I gave him the name of the coffee shop where he was waiting and started walking, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I found him sitting at a small table by the window, an untouched muffin in front of him. He stood up the moment he saw me, his eyes searching my face for clues. "Well?" he asked, pulling out a chair for me. I sank into it, the emotional exhaustion of the last 2 hours finally crashing over me. "She has his eyes, David," I said, the observation feeling like the most important detail. It was like looking at a piece of him, a piece I never knew was missing. I recounted the meeting for him, as much for my own processing as for his benefit. I told him about Mark's protective presence, about Sarah's calm demeanor, about the astonishing story of her mother's forgiveness. When I got to the part about the trust fund, his eyebrows shot up. You told her? Right there? I nodded, a fresh wave of nervousness washing over me. I had to. It didn't feel right holding it back. She didn't want to take it. She put the card in her purse, but I could tell she was shocked. David let out a long, slow breath. That's a lot to lay on someone in a first meeting, Mom. I know, I sighed, rubbing my temples. But it's the truth. The whole, messy truth. That's why we came here, isn't it? He didn't argue. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the people come and go outside, living their normal, uncomplicated lives. So, what now? He asked, echoing the question that had become the refrain of this entire journey. I don't know, I admitted. We go home, we wait. We've done all we can do. It felt simultaneously like a relief and a sentence. The drive back to Pennsylvania the next day was subdued. The high-stakes energy of the trip out was gone, replaced by a kind of emotional hangover. We were both lost in our own thoughts, processing the reality of Sarah. She was no longer an abstract concept or a name in a file. She was a real, breathing woman with Robert's eyes and a quiet strength that was entirely her own. When David dropped me off at my condo, the silence felt louder than ever. The place was exactly as we had left it, but I felt different. I had faced the secret, and I had survived. A week passed, then another. Life settled back into its mundane rhythm, but the undercurrent of waiting was still there, a constant low hum in the background. I didn't expect to hear from Sarah so soon, if ever. I assumed she would need months, maybe years, to process everything. So when my phone rang exactly 18 days after our meeting and her name appeared on the screen, my breath caught in my throat. Sarah? Hello? I answered, trying to keep my voice level. Hi, Linda, she said. Her voice was clear, more decisive than it had been in the cafe. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Of course it is, I said quickly. Mark and I have talked a lot, and I've done a lot of thinking, she began. The money, it's incredibly generous, but we can't accept it. My heart sank. I opened my mouth to protest, but she continued. Hear me out, please. My mother provided for me. We've built a good life here, on our own terms. Taking that money, it feels like it would somehow taint that. It would make my mother's struggle and her triumph feel cheapened. Do you understand? I did. I understood perfectly. It was about dignity, about the life she had built without Robert's help or his money. I understand, I said softly, the disappointment a dull ache. But, she said, and that single word held a new, unexpected weight. But we would like to try something else. We'd like to know you and David. The money was a symbol, Linda. We don't need the symbol. We're curious about the people. She paused, and I could hear her gathering her courage. Ethan, our oldest, is getting married next fall. It's going to be a small family wedding in our backyard. We were wondering if you and David would like to come. The offer hung in the air, so simple and yet so monumental. They weren't asking for a payout from the past. They were offering an invitation into their future. They were offering a connection, not a transaction. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. This was more than I had ever dared to hope for. Sarah, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. We would be honored, truly. Good, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, a real, genuine smile this time. I'll email you the details when we have them. And, Linda, thank you for reaching out, for being brave enough to open this door. We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation easy and light, about the wedding plans, about the bride, about the weather in Ohio. When we hung up, I sat in the profound quiet of my living room, the silence now feeling not empty, but full of possibility. I picked up the phone to call David, my hand steady for the first time in months, ready to tell him that the story wasn't ending. In many ways, it was just beginning. The months that followed Sarah's invitation were a strange and beautiful limbo. The crushing weight of the secret was gone, replaced by the delicate, tentative process of building a bridge across a 50-year chasm. We started with emails. Sarah and I would write to each other every week or so, short, careful messages at first, sharing little pieces of our lives. A book I'd enjoyed, a funny story from her classroom, a picture of Chloe building a sandcastle, an update on Ethan's wedding plans. It was like carefully exchanging pieces of a mosaic, slowly creating a picture of who we were, independent of the man who connected us. David was included in a group thread, and he'd chime in with his dry humor, sending along architectural designs he was working on or a particularly ridiculous meme. It was stilted at first, this digital dance, but gradually a rhythm emerged. We were getting to know each other, not as the custodian of Robert's secret and its victim, but as Linda and Sarah. The first major test was a video call. Sarah suggested it one evening in an email, writing, "I think it's time we all put faces to the names again, without the coffee shop jitters." I agreed, my stomach fluttering with a nervousness that felt strangely girlish. When the call connected, there was Sarah and Mark sitting on their sofa, and David was beside me on my couch. For the first few minutes, it was awkward, all of us talking a little too loudly, smiling a little too brightly. But then David, ever the pragmatist, broke the ice. He started asking Mark about his work as a civil engineer, and the two of them were soon deep in a conversation about infrastructure and load-bearing walls, a language of concrete and steel that was blessedly free of emotional baggage. Sarah and I watched them, and then looked at each other through the screen, and we both smiled, a real, relaxed smile of shared amusement. We talked for an hour, and when we hung up, it felt like a real milestone. We had shared space, even virtually, as a family. A weird, patchwork, unexpected family, but a family nonetheless. As the wedding date drew closer, the emails and calls became more frequent, more focused on practical details. Sarah sent me a picture of her dress, a lovely lavender sheath. I asked if I could help with the flowers, offering to cover the cost as a wedding gift. This time, she accepted without hesitation. "That would be wonderful, Linda. Thank you." It was a small thing, but it felt huge. I was being allowed to contribute, to have a role, however minor. David, Jessica, and Chloe were all invited, and the planning took on a new, joyful energy. We were no longer just preparing for a tense reunion. We were getting ready for a celebration. The shadow of Robert was still there, of course. He was the empty chair at this gathering, the ghost in the family portrait we were about to take. But the sharp, stabbing pain of his betrayal had begun to soften, scabbed over by the gentle, healing balm of this new connection. I found myself thinking of him with a sadder, more complicated kind of love, mourning the man he was while still struggling to understand the boy he had been. The week of the wedding finally arrived. The drive to Ohio felt entirely different this time. The anxiety was still there, a low hum, but it was now mixed with a genuine, bubbling excitement. David and Jessica chatted in the front seat while I sat in the back with Chloe, who was delighted by the long car ride and the promise of a party. We checked into the same hotel, but the mood was light, festive. The wedding was on a Saturday afternoon, and as we pulled up to Sarah and Mark's house, my breath caught. It was a charming, well-kept colonial with a sprawling backyard that was bustling with activity. White chairs were set up in rows, facing a flower-covered arch, and a small team was setting up a catering table. And then I saw her. Sarah was standing near the back door, directing traffic, looking beautiful and flustered and happy. She saw us getting out of the car, and her face broke into a wide, unreserved smile. She walked towards us, and this time, when we reached each other, we didn't hesitate. We hugged. It was a little awkward, a little stiff, but it was real. She smelled like gardenias and nervous sweat. "You're here," she said, pulling back, her eyes, Robert's eyes, shining. "I'm so glad you're here." She hugged David and Jessica, then knelt down to talk to Chloe, who immediately presented her with a crumpled dandelion she had picked from the lawn. Sarah took it with the gravity of a royal bouquet. "Why, thank you, Your Highness," she said, and Chloe beamed. The wedding itself was simple and profoundly moving. As Ethan and his bride, Maya, exchanged their vows under the arch, I looked around at the small gathering. I saw Mark dabbing at his eyes, his protective sternness melted away into pure paternal joy. I saw Noah, Sarah's younger son, who had his mother's smile. And I saw Sarah watching her son, her face a canvas of love and pride. My eyes met David's across the aisle, and I saw my own complex emotions reflected in his gaze. A bittersweet joy, a sense of rightness, and the lingering ghost of the man who should have been here to see this, to see both of his children, to see the whole, complicated, beautiful picture. After the ceremony, as everyone mingled, holding plates of barbecue and cake, Sarah found me near the punch bowl. She looped her arm through mine, a gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "Thank you for the flowers, Linda," she said softly, looking out at the vibrant centerpieces. "They're perfect." We stood there for a moment, two mothers, watching the new family that had just been made, bound together by the old family that had been broken. The past was a quiet ache, but the present was full of light and laughter, and for the first time in a very long time, the future felt wide open and full of grace. The wedding reception melted into a soft, golden evening. The fairy lights strung through the trees twinkling like captured fireflies. The formality of the day had given way to something looser, more comfortable. Mark had shed his suit jacket and was deep in conversation with David and Jessica, the three of them laughing about something, a sight that sent a warm ripple of relief through me. Chloe, sugar-fueled and deliriously happy, was being gently chased around the lawn by Noah, her squeals of laughter a perfect soundtrack to the deepening twilight. I found a quiet moment, stepping away from the crowd to lean against the trunk of a large oak tree, just watching it all, trying to imprint the scene on my memory. This was healing. It was messy and imperfect, but it was real. I felt a presence beside me and turned to see Sarah, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to me. "I thought you might need this," she said, her voice warm. "It's been a long day." We clinked glasses softly and stood in companionable silence, watching our families, our combined, complicated, wonderful families, mingle on the lawn. "Ethan and Maya are going to Hawaii for their honeymoon," Sarah said, after a moment, a wistful note in her voice. "I've never been." "Robert and I always talked about going," I replied, the memories surfacing without its usual sting. "We never did. Life, the business, David's schooling, there was always a reason to put it off." I took a sip of the champagne, the bubbles sharp and bright on my tongue. "I think I might go." The words were out of my mouth before I had even fully formed the thought. Sarah looked at me, surprised. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Really?" "Really," I said, the idea taking root and blooming with sudden, fierce certainty. "I have the time, I have the resources from the house, and I think I need to do something for myself, something that has nothing to do with the past and everything to do with the future." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Good for you, Linda. You should." She paused, then added, her tone shifting to something more tentative. "You know, Mark and I have our anniversary in a few months. Maybe, if you're not sick of us by then, we could all meet there, in Hawaii, a real vacation." The offer was so unexpected, so generous that it stole my breath. It wasn't just an invitation to a wedding. It was an invitation to build a new tradition, to create memories that were entirely our own, untainted by the shadows of the past. I would love that, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I would absolutely love that. The party eventually wound down. We helped with the initial cleanup, folding chairs and gathering discarded napkins, the mundane work feeling like a ritual of belonging. As we said our goodbyes, the hugs were longer, tighter, infused with a new sense of permanence. "Drive safe," Sarah said, holding my shoulders and looking right into my eyes. "And send me pictures from Hawaii when you book it." "I will," I promised. In the car on the way back to the hotel, Chloe fell asleep almost instantly in her car seat, exhausted and happy. Jessica turned to look at me from the front passenger seat. "She's lovely, Linda," she said softly. "They all are." David glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes soft. "You did good, Mom. You really did." Back in my hotel room, the silence felt different. It wasn't the lonely silence of my condo or the anxious silence before the first meeting. It was a peaceful, fulfilled silence. I had faced the unimaginable, and instead of finding more pain, I had found more family. I had looked into the eyes of my husband's secret and found not a monster, but a kind, resilient woman who had offered me not forgiveness, because I had not sinned, but connection. The sale of the dream home no longer felt like an act of desperation, but the first, necessary step toward building a new dream, one that was wider, more inclusive, and more honest than the one that had come before. The next morning, over a final breakfast before heading home, David seemed quieter than usual, poking at his pancakes with a thoughtful expression. "You okay, honey?" I asked. He looked up, his gaze clear and direct. "I've been thinking, Mom, about the trust, the money from the house that Sarah didn't want." I nodded, curious. "What about it?" "It's just sitting there," he said, "and it feels wrong. It was meant for her, for that branch of the family. She doesn't want it as cash, but what if we used it to create something? Something that would honor the whole story, the good and the bad." He leaned forward, his idea taking shape. "We could start a scholarship fund in Dad's name, not for architecture, but for single mothers studying education, in honor of Helen, and for Sarah." The beauty and the rightness of the idea hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was perfect. It would take the money born from a secret and a betrayal and transform it into a legacy of support and empowerment, honoring the two women Robert had failed. It would be a testament to their strength, not his weakness. Tears filled my eyes, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Oh, David," I whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "That is the most perfect idea I have ever heard." In that moment, looking at my son, the man his father had helped raise, who was now building a bridge of grace from the wreckage his father had left, I felt a chapter not just end, but truly, finally close. We were free. The ride home was filled with a new kind of energy, a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long. David and I talked animatedly about the scholarship fund, the logistics buzzing in our minds, not as a burden, but as a thrilling project. We would name it the Helen and Sarah Miller Scholarship for Future Educators, a tribute that felt just and right. We decided the initial endowment from the house sale would be enough to provide a substantial annual award for years to come, and we would both sit on the selection committee. The idea transformed the money from a symbol of guilt into a tool for hope, and it felt like we were finally truly laying Robert's ghost to rest by doing something unequivocally good with the remnants of his secret. When David dropped me off at my condo, the space no longer felt like a lonely way station. It felt like a launch pad. The first thing I did, even before unpacking, was to open my laptop and start researching trips to Hawaii. I wasn't just planning a vacation, I was reclaiming a dream, for myself this time. Life settled into a new, richer rhythm. The emails and video calls with Sarah's family continued, but the undercurrent of tension was gone, replaced by a warm, easy familiarity. We talked about mundane things, the challenge of finding a plumber, a new recipe we'd tried, the antics of our grandchildren. It was in these ordinary exchanges that the extraordinary nature of our connection truly took root. We were becoming family, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine, growing affection. A few weeks after the wedding, I officially booked my trip to Hawaii, a 2-week stay on Maui. When I told Sarah, she was thrilled. "Mark and I just booked ours too," she said over the phone, her voice giddy. "We're coordinating the dates. This is really happening." The shared anticipation of this future adventure became a bright thread running through our conversations, a symbol of the new memories we were determined to make, ones that belonged only to us. Meanwhile, David and I threw ourselves into establishing the scholarship fund. We met with a financial advisor and a lawyer, drafting the bylaws and the mission statement. The process was cathartic. We were building something tangible and positive from the emotional wreckage. We decided the first scholarship would be awarded the following spring, and we would fly Sarah and Mark out for the small ceremony. When we told Sarah about the plan, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I worried for a moment that we had overstepped, that we were forcing a legacy onto her mother that she might not want. But when she finally spoke, her voice was choked with emotion. That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for her memory," she whispered. "Thank you. She would have loved that." In that moment, I felt a circle complete. The woman I had never met, whose life had been so intimately tangled with mine, was being honored, and her daughter was granting us the privilege of doing so. The months flew by, a blur of planning and happy anticipation. The Hawaii trip became a beacon on the horizon. When the time finally came, the excitement at the airport was palpable. David, Jessica, and Chloe came to see me off, their hugs full of love and encouragement. "Send us pictures of the beach, Grandma," Chloe demanded, and I promised I would. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. I watched movies, read a book, and stared out the window at the endless blue, feeling a sense of liberation with every mile that passed. When the plane finally descended, the islands emerged from the Pacific like emeralds set in turquoise, a sight so breathtaking it brought tears to my eyes. Robert and I had dreamed of this, but I was no longer here with his ghost. I was here for me. I collected my bags, took a deep breath of the warm, plumeria-scented air, and walked out of the airport, ready to embrace whatever this new chapter held. I had a week to myself before Sarah and Mark arrived, and I intended to spend every moment of it rediscovering who I was, alone and unafraid under the vast Hawaiian sky. That first week in Hawaii was a baptism of sorts, an immersion in solitude that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had not been truly alone without the weight of Robert's memory or the anxiety over Sarah in years. I stayed in a small, charming rental cottage just steps from the beach, and for the first few days, I did nothing but walk. I walked for miles along the shoreline, the warm, foamy water washing over my feet, the rhythm of the waves a soothing balm to my spirit. I let the sun bake the lingering chill of grief from my bones. I ate when I was hungry, slept when I was tired, and read books that had nothing to do with loss or family secrets. I cried once, sitting on a lava rock watching the sunset paint the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of letting go of the woman who had defined herself solely as a wife and a mother, and embracing the woman who was still there, who was capable of navigating the world on her own terms. I felt myself unfolding, petal by petal, in the tropical heat. When the day arrived for Sarah and Mark to land, a flicker of the old nervousness returned. What if the easy camaraderie we'd built over distance and screens didn't translate to a full week of shared space? I pushed the thought aside, remembering the hug in her backyard, the shared laughter at the wedding. I drove to the airport to pick them up, and the moment I saw them walking through the arrivals gate, tired but smiling, the nervousness vanished. Sarah hugged me tightly. "You look amazing," she said, pulling back to look at me. "This sun agrees with you." I realized I felt amazing. Lighter. We loaded their luggage into the rental car, and the easy banter from our video calls picked up right where it had left off. Mark, now fully relaxed, pointed out various birds and plants from the passenger seat, his engineer's mind fascinated by the island's ecology. We arrived at their hotel, a lovely resort not far from my cottage, and they settled in. The week that followed was pure magic. It was not a dramatic, life-altering event, but a series of small, perfect moments that wove us tighter together. We snorkeled in a cove teeming with neon-colored fish, and Sarah, who was usually so composed, squealed with childlike delight through her snorkel, grabbing my arm to point at a sea turtle gliding serenely beneath us. We took a helicopter tour over the lush, waterfall-laced valleys of the interior, and I sat beside Mark, who narrated the geological formations with enthusiastic awe. We shared long, lazy meals on restaurant patios overlooking the ocean, talking for hours about everything and nothing. We never explicitly talked about Robert. He was the silent, receding tide that had washed us all onto the same shore, but we were too busy building sandcastles in the present to keep looking back at the water. One evening, as we were watching the sun dip below the horizon, sipping tropical drinks, Sarah turned to me, her face soft in the twilight. "You know, I spent so much of my life wondering about him," she said quietly, her gaze on the horizon. "But being here with you, it feels like I was never missing him. I was missing this." She gestured between us. "I was missing you." It was the greatest gift she could have given me. On our last night, we had a farewell dinner at a fancy beachfront restaurant. We were all a little sunburned, a little sad that the trip was ending, but deeply, profoundly happy. As we shared a decadent chocolate dessert, Mark cleared his throat. "Sarah and I have been talking," he began, a shy smile playing on his lips. "And we have an idea. We know you have your life back in Pennsylvania, and we'd never want to pull you from that, but our guest room is always open. And we were thinking, maybe for Thanksgiving this year, you and David's family would like to come to us. We'd love to have you, to start a new tradition." The offer was so full of warmth and inclusion that it left me speechless. I looked at Sarah, her eyes hopeful, and then at Mark, his face open and sincere. They weren't just offering a holiday meal. They were offering a permanent place at their table. My family, which had felt so fractured and reduced, had just doubled in size. "I can't think of anything I'd love more," I said, my voice thick with emotion. The following day, we said our goodbyes at the airport, but they weren't the uncertain goodbyes of before. They were see you soon goodbyes, filled with the concrete plans of holidays and future visits. As I watched them walk toward their gate, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun with a sold house and a shattered illusion had led me here, to a new family, a new sense of self, and a future that was brighter and more expansive than any I could have imagined. The return flight home was a time of quiet reflection, the hum of the jet engines a soothing backdrop to the whirlwind of emotions and memories. I stared out at the carpet of clouds below, not with the anxiety of my outbound journey, but with a deep, settled contentment. The Hawaiian sun had seeped into my soul, and the laughter shared with Sarah and Mark had mended fractures in my spirit I hadn't even fully acknowledged. Landing back in Pennsylvania, the crisp autumn air was a shock to the system, but a welcome one. It felt like coming home to a new life, not just a place. David and Chloe picked me up from the airport, and Chloe's frantic, joyful wave from the arrivals hall was the perfect welcome. "Grandma, did you bring me a shell?" she yelled, launching herself into my arms. I had, of course, a small, perfect cowrie shell I'd found on my last solo walk on the beach. In the car, as David navigated the familiar roads, I told them about the trip, not in the detailed, emotional way I would later with David, but in the bright, colorful snippets a 4-year-old would appreciate. The big turtle, the sweet pineapple, the helicopter that went chop, chop, chop. David kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, a small, knowing smile on his face. He could see the change in me. When we got to my condo, it truly felt like home for the first time. It was no longer the place I'd retreated to. It was my base camp for a new and adventurous future. The photographs on the walls, of David, of Jessica, of Chloe, now had a new space waiting beside them. A space I knew would soon be filled with pictures from Hawaii, from Thanksgiving in Ohio, from a life that was still unfolding in the most beautiful ways. The following week, David and I had our first official meeting with the community foundation that would be administering the Helen and Sarah Miller Scholarship. Sitting in a sleek conference room surrounded by charts and legal documents, the reality of what we were doing hit me with fresh force. This was permanent. Long after we were gone, this fund would be helping women, single mothers like Helen had been, to build a better future for themselves and their children. We were turning our family's pain into someone else's opportunity. As I signed the final paperwork, my hand was steady, my heart full. It felt like the most important signature of my life. After the meeting, David and I went out for lunch. Over sandwiches, he looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "You're different, Mom. In a good way. A really good way." I smiled. I feel different. I feel like I've finally finished cleaning out a very cluttered, very dark attic, and now there's all this light and space. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you." The promise of Thanksgiving in Ohio became a bright, steady star to navigate by as the fall deepened. The emails and texts with Sarah were now a constant, joyful stream. We planned the menu with an enthusiasm that was about more than food. It was about the ritual of creating a shared history. She was making her mother's famous sweet potato casserole, and I volunteered to bring my grandmother's pumpkin pie recipe, the one Robert had always loved. The thought of baking it for this new family, in the home of the daughter he never knew, felt not like a betrayal, but like a peaceful passing of the torch. The day before we were set to drive to Ohio, a small, flat package arrived in the mail for me. The return address was Sarah's. Puzzled, I opened it. Inside was a simple, beautiful silver frame, and inside the frame was a photograph from Hawaii. It was of Sarah and me, our arms around each other, squinting into the sun with identical, joyful smiles on our faces. The resemblance, in that moment of pure happiness, was unmistakable. It wasn't just Robert's eyes I saw in her. It was a shared spirit, a resilience, a capacity for joy that had transcended the pain of the past. I placed the frame on my mantle, right in the center, a testament to the most unexpected and precious gift my husband's secret had ultimately given me. A sister.